All right, let's come back into this discussion of the show today, and we are looking at something very important because it challenges the stereotypes of what we see when we think about malnutrition. Sometimes you think it's all about being underweight, but no. Malnutrition doesn't only look like an underweight child anymore. Experts say they are increasingly seeing children who are overweight or obese because they're not eating the right foods. Families are filling stomachs, not nourishing bodies. According to UNICEF's latest global report, obesity has overtaken underweight scenarios as the most common form of malnutrition among school-aged children and adolescents. To help us to talk about how this looks like, Nellie Zembe is joining us on the line, Group Head of Monitoring, Evaluation, Research and Learning at Afrika Tikkun. Nellie, thank you for joining us right here on Channel Africa.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that probably was shaped by how we grew up seeing what malnutrition looks like on the African continent. We've always thought that being underweight is what we should be avoiding as malnutrition, but it's not that simple.
Yes, and that's what mainstream information tells us. It's a stunted child. You see them, they are, smaller than the rest of the children, their age group, and that is still a problem on the continent, with about 27% of children actually in Africa being undernourished. In South Africa, this number is actually, it matches the continent as well. But what we're seeing is that more and more, the number on the other side of malnutrition is also increasing, with almost 15% of children now being overweight and some obese. And this is also a symptom of malnutrition. And when you trace it back, it's directly connected to everything that is happening in the country. And so when we are putting in interventions, we're almost forced to look at it from both angles, because there is no way of predicting how this is going to affect children now.
Yeah. Nellie, I think the words themselves are what have been confusing us for the longest time in terms of our perception of malnutrition, because we think that malnutrition means hunger. So obviously, if you're hungry and you don't have food, you're going to look a particular way. But it doesn't particularly mean that if you're malnourished, you're hungry. Are those two, am I correct to say that?
There's still a connection, right? Because if you're hungry and the family can't afford nutritious food, they're then going to opt for the cheaper options of food, which is your carb-dense, very carb-heavy kind of food. And so at the source of the problem is still hunger. It's still affordability of food. But what then happens is either a child goes without completely, which then leads to, being underweight, being stunted, and them just being smaller than the rest of their development is then delayed. But on the other angle, where parents can afford even little, they're then opting for, your pap, it's porridge in the morning, it's pap in the evenings. We're not focusing on things like your vegetables and fruit that are high in fibers and high in the kind of nutrients that children need. And this is of no fault of parents as well. They're going for the options that are accessible to them and what they can afford. So I would say hunger is still the problem at the end of the day. But now if you add affordability into the mix, we're seeing now years later that a problem that used to be amongst adults, we were seeing obesity and overweight as children were in their adolescence. But now we're seeing it earlier, right? We're seeing it as early as 2, 3. You can tell that children are overweight.
Let's talk about that, because, I want us to just divide some of the elements that you've spoken about. I mean, we'll speak a little bit about the obesity problem, but let's start with the cost of food as a problem there, because we've had a lot of people in this feature coming in and saying, no, vegetables are not cheap. They're not, expensive. They're pretty cheap. You must just make provision in your budget. Is it that simple to say, no, vegetables are not cheap?
So vegetables are not cheap, especially if you're looking at getting them from, big supermarkets. And we can't deny the fact that fruit and vegetable is expensive, right? It's fresh fruit, it's fresh food, and so they also want to move it quickly. It's not as affordable as it is to the average person in South Africa. So there is quite a lot of people who it's inaccessible to, but also it's not as affordable as the price tag on it. It's the consistency that you need. It's not a matter of having vegetables once in a week and then we call it affordable. But I think we also need to look at the source differently, right? We've become so accustomed to having everything ready that we are not really getting to the bottom of can we even supply our own vegetables. And so this is where we come in as Afrika Tikkun, and in so many different angles, we've been promoting growing your own vegetables, right? So when you have that relationship with vegetables that is coming from a very primary perspective of seeing it grow, of nurturing it, of eating it fresh, having it in whatever form, it changes your relationship with fruit and vegetable as well.
Let's speak about some of the interventions that you guys have come up with at Afrika Tikkun. Of course, there's so many communities that are in need. In fact, the majority of people in South Africa and on the continent are in need. So how do you fill this gap where you realize that malnutrition is actually, big in many of these communities?
So in a couple of ways, because we are working from cradle to career, which is from 2 years old all the way to 35. We've got children and young people of all sorts of ages in our centers and at our different sites. So nutrition and what we do for the programs is also very different. The one thing that's common is everyone receives at least 2 meals a day. And this is in support of everything else that we're trying to do with education support, skills development. We've recognized that you can't do that with someone who's hungry. You can't do it with someone who hasn't been fed enough or who hasn't been fed well. And well is particularly important, especially at the 2 to 6 age group, where we are really focused on gross motor development, fine motor skills, the stuff that we might think is a luxury, but directly connects to the cognitive development of children. And so at that age group, we're providing 4 meals, right from breakfast when they arrive, whether they've received it at home. We're equalizing all children that come to us to say the meal is there and it's available if children need it. And what we found is that parents also then just come to appreciate that option as part of the offering of the program. But more importantly for us, as we monitor body mass index by measuring their heights and weights 4 times a year. We are looping that with feedback with parents where we're picking out children who are underweight or who are obese. We're then having the conversation very early with parents to find out what's happening. Sometimes it's just a misinformation thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. Sometimes parents are actually thinking the overweightness is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
They're like, no, but I thought my child was healthy. And then you start to really educate as early as 2 when they're with us. And parents are very willing to engage with us if you connect with them as equals and not necessarily as the authority figure who's walking around with a stick talking about children's weight, right?
Absolutely. And that association that you've made is so interesting, the fact that in our communities, obesity is seen as a happy child. Oh, this child is so happy, must eat a lot. I mean, how do we deal with those kind of things? Because they, also we've got that trauma with poverty history, right? Where we come from. I never ate, so my children need to eat, So that's always the frame in which we see how we raise our kids and the relationship that they have with food as well. We'll speak a little bit more about that, Nellie, after our break. We're speaking to Nellie Zembe, Group Head of Monitoring, Evaluation, Research and Learning at Afrika Tikkun. What's your take on this one? Remember that WhatsApp number is still there, +27 63 406 9126. Engage.
Africa in Business on Channel Africa.
The United States was very vocal at the beginning of South Africa's G20 presidency, and this is largely due to strained relations with South Africa at the time, that they were not really keen on participating. Where do they stand right now?
The US is planning to take over the presidency of the G20 next year, and our understanding from them is that they intend to continue to do so, and therefore it is quite difficult then to be in a situation where you are not attending deputies' meetings or discussions during our presidency and then to take over the presidency next year. From a finance track perspective, there has been engagement. We've been working on a communique last week and this week here in Zimbabwe. What's important about that is that it's a consensus document. And so all the members in the room have to agree to the language that is used there. And our US colleagues have been part of those discussions and negotiations.
Bringing the African markets into your home. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Palesa and Benjamin fuel your day with fresh African perspective on Channel Africa.
We're still speaking to Nellie Zembe, who's the group head of monitoring, evaluation and research and learning at Afrika Tikkun, an organization that's trying to change the face of nutrition in many malnutritioned environments here in South Africa, saying it's not enough to count how many children get fed, but we do need to ask what is it that they're eating that can contribute to malnutrition. You know, before the break, just to backtrack a little bit there, Nellie, you spoke about, the fact that parents had these misconceptions about what nutrition actually looked like. And of course, that look of, hey, if you look a particular way, that means you must be well fed. And so parents say it all the time. It feels a little bit like an African proverb. I take good care of you. I feed you. Look at how big and healthy you look. So everything must be okay. And you say as Afrika Tikkun, you're also taking, outside of the nutrition programs themselves, you're taking on the responsibility to teach parents how to keep their children well fed with the right nutrition. What are some of the misconceptions that you've heard that parents have about nutrition, and some of the thoughts and questions that they have around making sure their children are healthy and not malnourished?
And that's exactly it. The main thing is, that my child is healthy, right? They're not hungry. I'm feeding them well. I'm doing my best. But because we're so focused on holistic development, we have to pay attention to what's happening, even at that level. It's not something you can ignore just because your focus is on the education and development of the child. Everything is connected, especially at that age. So another thing that also comes up is, this is genetic, right? This is in my family.
We're all like this.
We're all like this, it's always been like this, it's never been a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or, they'll grow it out, this is baby fat. And so all of these things, it's not to judge parents per se, right? Because we've all shared these perceptions at some point. What makes a difference is when there's been intentional awareness raising and when it's not done from a judgmental perspective. And so in our capacity, we make sure that we're talking about this and we're talking about it openly. And we're also showing parents the why, right? This is not just a matter of, because textbooks say this is what it's supposed to be. We're making the connections for them, the long-term connections, and really linking it to how children are performing at all developmental stages. But it's not just at that level, right? Sometimes you also see it with adolescents. So even in our after-schools program, we are wanting for parents to understand the importance of just having that hot meal, even if it's one meal after school. There's a place where you can actually find it and the difference that it makes for the studying and how they show up for their school. But more importantly, how they start to show up for physical exercise. But we also want to link them doing it for themselves. So it's not a matter of this meal can be found at Afrika Tikkun. It's how can we make this a sustainable habit and process that's happening at home. And so we include gardening programs. We've linked it with our farming program. There's a lot of programs.
Can I come, please? Sounds very kind of like a thing I would like to do as a parent.
They said until 35, Benji.
I'm coming. I know I'm not 35, but I'm coming. Look, what you expose to kids is exactly what they're going to be drawn to. I'm seeing it with my 1-year-old son because, lately we've kind of like tried to introduce him alternatives to porridge and those kind of things. But there's something that I don't know. I was like the African father in me was like, this kid is going to eat my belly. You must understand what sorghum is, And the older he gets, it kind of reverts back to that mabele porridge because it's kind of his thing. He enjoys it more than the plain porridge, right? And it made me think like it's exactly what you expose your child to that will actually determine what they're actually going to enjoy. And I don't think we as parents understand that power. Yeah.
And that food is very cultural, right? Like so the experience of eating is very communal in nature, and so the stuff you enjoy is so linked to the process in which it was made and how you sat down to eat it, and what it was associated with. And so there's a lot that we can do at a family engagement level just to shift, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with porridge, right? It's delicious. It's a balance thing. So what happens with the meal afterwards and the meal after that? What happens with the meal on the next day?
Yeah.
Right? So It's not to take away the stuff that we enjoy, the stuff that's beautiful at all. Is to just plug in information and knowledge so that we can balance it out and not have the crutch of, but this is expensive, we can't afford this, this is not necessary, this doesn't taste nice. We can really do away with some of that stigma around food.
Yeah. Well, some of the programs that you guys have implemented, are making sure that the change actually takes place and you monitor the change. I can see you guys say that you monitor these children's BMI twice a year to see exactly the progress that they're making. But outside of whether, they're losing weight or gaining weight, the visible, progress, what other progress have you seen in these children who are getting more nourishment in their meals?
For cognitive development, right, ultimately they tend to then enjoy school, right? When a child is healthy and they're being, their bodies are really being nourished, they show up for school, right? That tiredness, the lack of concentration, it all comes back to what are they eating, what's actually going into their bodies. And so the healthier they get, the more they move, the better they develop as well. And so ultimately we see it in school readiness, especially at that level. Healthy kids are just healthy all around. So that would be a big way. But also feedback from parents, right? So we really engage with parents to find out, is anything different from a home perspective? And so if they're giving us positive feedback, then we're doing something right. And, it's not always a hit. Sometimes it's a miss. We feed something and they're just like, this is not working out for children. And so then we have to adapt. It really is just a collaboration with parents.
Now, something that we also take for granted are the liquids, what children are drinking. How is essential is also this element?
And the sugar, right? Children are not drinking enough water. Yeah. That's also one of the things that we've noticed. So with each meal, right, we're not giving juice. We're actually making sure that children have had water. And the more you drink water, this even as an adult, right? Like if it's plugged in the first couple of days, before you know it, you're actually asking for it. Yeah. So we're making sure that they're drinking water and not necessarily juice. Juice is once in a while. I mean, every child deserves a juice box. So, but just making sure that they are hydrated, because a lot of the sugar is coming from what they're drinking. We're adding a lot of sugar into the tea just so that they can drink it. All of those things are ways in which we're just trying to make sure that what we are providing and the information that we're then giving parents as well. So even when we're sending back some of the foods, because of the areas in which we work, some of the parents would bring, food in the bags. We have to just pull the parent aside and speak about, this is not necessary. We're going to provide this at the school. And
I love that. Well, we'll wrap it up there, Nellie. We've run out of time. Where can we go to find out more about, this particular initiative, but also other initiatives by Afrika Tikkun?
Please go to afrikatikkun.org. That's Africa with a K, TIKKUN.org.
Thank you so much, Nellie, for your time. That's Nellie Zembe, Group Head of Monitoring, Evaluation and Research and Learning at Afrika Tikkun, speaking to us about a really important program that focuses on malnutrition on children. So very important. Just because your child looks healthy doesn't particularly mean they are. We need to make sure that the right nutrition is given to them.